Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Closer Look, the show dedicated to bringing you the facts. We ask the questions no one else will, and we get the answers that no one else can. I'm Ewurabena. Thanks so much for joining us. Today for me, tomorrow for you. Now, if your mama and grandmama are like my mama and grandmama, then you've likely heard this idiom many times. It's a reminder that we should never dismiss the challenges of those around us because you can never be sure of what your own future holds. And if you're like me, then you've had to learn the lesson the hard way many times. More often than not, we cannot, or rather refuse not to see the forest for the trees. This is a hard lesson that the global community is now also learning, particularly on the issue of climate change. Whereas countries in the Caribbean have long lived the impacts of environmental degradation at the hands of larger countries, only now are they experiencing what we've been saying all along. One need only turn on the news to see proof of this. The planet is getting hotter. In fact, rising temperatures are at the root of intense fires, melting tarmacs, and as we are all too aware, more intense hurricanes. For almost 30 years, Caribbean countries like the Bahamas have been advocating for larger emission countries to consider the impact that their actions have on the environment and, by extension, small island developing states. And unfortunately, we have been largely ignored. That is, until now. With the impact of climate change now at their own doorsteps and regional leaders decidedly championing the needs of the Caribbean, we as a people finally have an opportunity for our concerns to be heard. Last week, regional leaders converged in the capital to plot the way forward. In a first-of-its-kind conference on climate change, Caribbean prime ministers met as part of a unified front ahead of the 2022 UN Climate Change Conference in Egypt. The brainchild of Prime Minister the Honorable Philip Davis, the two-day event was designed to gather stakeholders from all relevant sectors to craft a regional position on the issues from mitigation, adaptation, financing, and more. Tonight, we sit down with Prime Minister Davis to discuss his vision, and as an added treat, we will hear from a very special guest in the person of Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mottley, who has been widely regarded for her strong stance on the issue as well. Tonight, we take a closer look into the ongoing war against climate change, the impacts, and the way forward. Stay with us. The conversation begins on the other side of the break. On August 16th, Prime Minister the Honorable Philip Davis officially opened the Caribbean Regional Heads of Government meeting on climate change, where stakeholders gathered here in the capital at the Bahama Resort Convention Center to plot the way forward on what officials say is perhaps one of the most pressing issues of our time. For decades, countries across the Caribbean have lamented the negative impact of rising temperatures on small island developing states like the Bahamas. However, the conversations surrounding climate change and its impact have been thrust into the spotlight yet again as the global community is now being forced to come to terms with that impact as well. Reports of intense wildfires, melting tarmacs, and of course, more frequent and more intense hurricanes have become even more commonplace as temperatures continue to rise. It is against this dire backdrop that prime ministers from Grenada, Dominica, Barbados, and their respective delegations converged at this first-of-a-kind meeting, which was designed to craft a unified regional position on climate-related concerns ahead of the 2022 UN Climate Change Conference. Over a 3-day period, government officials met with international organizations and NGOs, including financial institutions, to discuss issues related to mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. Now, according to the Prime Minister, these represent the pillars upon which real climate change relief can be achieved. As the conversations continue around this important issue, regional leaders say change can only occur via real collaboration at every level. While calling on developed countries to do their part in providing climate change funding and assistance, officials say regional unity, coupled with a desire by everyday people to reduce their individual and collective carbon footprints, are the first step to addressing the issues at hand. Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm joined now in studio by Prime Minister of the Bahamas, the Honorable Philip Davis, and Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Mottley. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have both climate change champions with us this morning. Prime Minister Davis, this first question is for you. The gathering that we had this week of the heads of government was really an important step in the fight against climate change. Can you tell us, why was that so important for you specifically?
Well, for me, it's important because I'm one who believes that together we are stronger, and we are not in this fight alone. Our geography is similar, and our challenges are similar. And so as Caribbean people, as Caribbean nations, it'll be good for us to speak in one voice. And I was happy to be identified as the country to host the first of the Caribbean region on climate change pre-COP event. And we in the Caribbean appreciate that there's been a lot of talk about resolving our challenges and issues, but no action.
Absolutely. And
we think that if we continue to press as a unified region, we expect more results.
Mm-hmm. Prime Minister Mottley, my question to you is, this is the first time the Caribbean is sort of leading the charge in this way. Can you speak to our ability as a region to really make an impact at COP27? Do you really think coming together in the way that we have, and we've seen heads of government come together, is it really going to make a difference?
We have no choice. Simple. I mean, Prime Minister Davis said it, that our geography is similar, our challenges are similar. And, you know, there's a reason why people who are small or institutions who are small come together in solidarity, because we can achieve together far more than individually. And I don't need to remind the people of Bahamas what's at stake. You've lived it. The last time I was in the Bahamas was, in fact, immediately after Hurricane Dorian, when I came with other colleague Caribbean prime ministers to assess the damage and to see what we could do. And for me, it was a particularly poignant moment, because 1 week before Hurricane Dorian hit the Bahamas, it literally came immediately over Barbados. Two things saved us. One, that it moved quickly, whereas it sat on you for 2 days. And two, that thing called the Sahara dust, which we complain about normally, has given us bad sinus problems and congestion. The Sahara dust sucked all of the convection out of Hurricane Dorian.
Right.
So we didn't have a drop of rain when the hurricane passed over us. You know, when your grandparents tell you there, but for the grace of God, well, that's how Barbados felt when Bahamas got hit by Dorian. So for us, we have to come together. And I want to salute Prime Minister Davis for taking the initiative and having this coordinating conference here. In our view, the Caribbean should never be going to COP as individual countries. We need to go together with a strong, united message And we are, yes, global leaders in this because we are the canaries in the mine that have been facing all of the initial parts of the crisis on our own. Now the rest of the world is doing it.
Right. Prime Minister, Minister Mottley spoke to, the impact of Hurricane Dorian. And while Bahamians have lived through, the impact of climate change, we find that a lot of Bahamians still see it as this high-level issue that's a little far removed from them. How do we get Bahamians to prioritize this issue and put them in a position to really take action?
Well, I don't know that I truly agree that they are so now disconnected.
Okay.
It is true, I think, prior to Hurricane Dorian, we were not as sensitive to the impact of these storms, but Hurricane Dorian was a wake-up call for us all. And one of the things that I've been doing is engaging the youth of our country. This year, I hosted with the University of Bahamas a youth forum with One Youth World, a regional forum on climate change, sensitizing our young people, because it's their future that we are hoping to protect for them. And in July, we had the national One Youth World again in July. In fact, we had about two young persons from Barbados that joined our young people here, which was a very exciting event for them, and they gave us some demands, which I hope to have taken to COP as well from the One Young World organization. But I think by getting the younger people, and that's where I think the ride towards success will begin.
Absolutely.
With the young voices being out there.
Minister Mottley, as a champion of climate justice and the call for compensation continues, how important is it that we then go a little further, and demand action from the developed world in terms of their damaging environmental practices?
Well, as I said, I mean, that's what we're doing. Look, our advocacy has been strong on this issue. We didn't cause the problem. In fact, I keep making the point that we suffer double jeopardy. Our people, through their blood, sweat, and tears, provided the wealth for the Industrial Revolution to take place. It is the Industrial Revolution that has had the greatest contribution to greenhouse gas emissions and the climate crisis that we now face. And therefore, when we are on the front line of this crisis, it is as a result of the Industrial Revolution which we helped to fund. So that on both counts we have lost, and we have therefore to raise our voices in concert with others, not just governments but individuals across the world, to be able to say enough is enough, and that we need now to fight these battles. Mitigation can take place anywhere in the world, and we want that, and we want to encourage that. But if we have to adapt to a new reality because of these increased temperatures, then we've got to spend money. We've got to spend money on protecting our coastal areas. There are communities I know in Barbados that would have previously lived in right on the coast. Some of them, one of them in particular, they had to move. And you can find examples of that all through the region. Similarly, there's saltwater incursion into a lot of our aquifers, our wells. And once that happens, we can't use the water, groundwater, in order to be able to allow people to have access to water. I call the heart attacks of the climate crisis hurricanes. But you know what the chronic NCD is? It's the droughts. It's the sargassum seaweed, both of which that are literally attacking us daily without us registering the manner in which we do so.
So if I may interject, as a follow-up question, I know there were other organizations present at this week's conference, financial institutions. What were those conversations like, and how likely are we, or what kind of support are we hoping to receive from them?
That's a long-term battle, medium-term battle. I mean, I just came off the call with U.S. Treasury, with a subcommittee that we set up with the American government post-Summit of the Americas. And there are some things that we want to be able to have action on. Barbados has, for example, something called natural disaster clauses, so that if we get hit by a hurricane, there's an immediate recognition by the lender that we can postpone and defer our payments until the back end of it by 2 years. And at the same time, what it does is to give us the fiscal space, the equivalent of 18% of GDP, in our case almost $1 billion US, to be able to help. Now if you had that, and if we have that going forward, there's no country nor no company nor no entity that's going to give the Bahamas or Barbados that equivalent. So we're fighting for that to be a standard in all of our commercial debt instruments, as well as our instruments with the multilateral development banks.
The Prime Minister, as we move toward COP27, what does success look like for you? As someone who's championing this cause on the behalf of the Bahamas, what does success look like?
Well, I would say that we would be successful if we can get the COP27 to adopt, for example, that a 2% tax is levied on oil exports. I will say that we have a success if we are able to get the what I call the committing countries and the pledging countries to actually commit and pledge and fulfill their promises to us. I think that will be that will be success. But we are cautiously optimistic. We know how the developed world has been operating over the last 27 years. Promises and pledges, but you know, I think we are pledge fatigue now.
So if that being the case, you know, if our expectations are not met, or if the outcomes don't meet your expectations, what do you think the next steps should be?
Well, the next step will be to continue to advocate. We just can't give up.
Yeah.
We just got to keep pushing and keep.
You know the song by Jimmy Cliff? You can get it if you really want, but you must try and try and try. We'll succeed at last. Look, I want to help contextualize this, because we live in a world where people expect instant gratification and instant solutions. This is not one such area. This is a highly nuanced and complex area, and we are likely to have to fight for many years in order to gain aspects of what we want. So we learn to recognize small victories and claim them and build on top of them and go again.
Prime Minister, I know one of the things coming out of this conference was the opportunities for blue carbon credits and carbon markets, and that's something that you've been pushing and your administration has really been focused on in the last several weeks. Can you explain what these opportunities are and how they present opportunities for the country?
Well, Article 6 of the Paris Convention provided an opportunity for the creation of what the money market will call new assets. Okay. Right, new commercial assets, which is converted to be carbon credits. That requires us to identify what our assets are, our natural assets are, which absorb the carbon that decarbonize the air, and once we're able to identify those, quantify it, and have it verified, there is a value for it. And we have been very active in this arena. We have passed legislation to govern this new asset. And with the science that we have been able to embrace, which is being embraced by the money markets, we hope to be able to find new streams of revenue. We wanted to share this with our Caribbean colleagues as well, so that, because we cannot, we're talking about accessing funds. And accessing funds, meaning looking outside of ourselves for it. And the time is, we're not getting it as quickly as we ought to. It's becoming, to me, more difficult to access. And so we need to look from within. How could we ourselves find alternative means of getting revenue to assist us in the challenges that's brought on by the climate catastrophes that we endure? How we do it for mitigation, adaptation. Loss and damage is another issue, but I think, because I think time has come, that's where climate justice, has to be the response to loss and damage.
Okay. I think one thing that's evidently clear is that you're both very personally passionate about this issue. How do we, as a region, really ensure that the conversations about climate change, the war against climate change, and the fight for climate justice, how do we ensure that that fight is sustained, past your personal administrations?
By getting the young people to embrace it, as the Prime Minister has been doing here, as I'm trying to do it. One of the Barbadians who I'm proudest of is a little young Barbadian, 12, 13 years old, Maria, who has been doing amazing work in trying to promote it globally.
Prime Minister, same question.
Yes, it's the same way, as you said, just to get the young people, keep people involved. I know that, and it's also an interesting question because at COP26, for example, which was my first COP, the question going there, I realized it was 26 years, as our fellow Prime Minister Skirt was reminding us yesterday. This is the 27th year, and what is happening to us? More droughts, severe droughts, wildfires, severe, more frequent hurricanes that are more intense. So what has been happening over the last 26, 27 years? If you've been talking about it for that long. And the one thing was asked of me whilst in Glasgow is whether it was political will. And whereas that may have some contributing factor, a contributing factor, what struck me at that event was maybe it's more political change. And that came home to me when President Biden spoke, because it was then a recognition of political change. He was then recommitting, re-engaging the Paris Accord. Why? Because President Trump had pulled out of it. So with Trump coming in, that was change. And so the approach to fulfilling commitments and living up to the obligations that's been that the U.S. obligated itself to was postponed and cancelled. Biden comes in and he re-engages.
Right.
But then that means he has to catch up from what has been rolled back. And one of the things that we need to also keep in the forefront is how we ensure that political change doesn't return back. And that's some of the things we have to. That's why talking to the youth, and ensuring that they are sensitive to these issues is really key in the continuing fight that we have.
Well, as we prepare to wrap up here today, I would like both of you to sort of speak to the friendship that you have developed together, and what does that symbolize for the future of the fight against climate change and the future of the region as a whole?
Who you work best with? People you know or you don't know?
People I know.
Exactly. So I mean, look, we're one family in this region, and as I said, it's brought home to me more and more. I think Prime Minister's daughter is actually related to my family.
Wow.
That's right.
And they actually live in my constituency in Barbados, her family. So, I mean, it's one family, trust me, in this region.
Yeah. And relationships do help. Like you say, it's better to work with people that you know. The Prime Minister Mottley's father and I had a long-standing relationship back in the 80s, early 90s, as we served together on the Council of Legal Education. That's how I got to first meet Prime Minister Mottley when you were at the UWI faculty. And so those relationships help, and we help each other. Because, she's been at it for much longer than I have, so I'm piggybacking up. And so I was so pleased that she was able to join us on this trip, because it was not easy. Because come tomorrow or tonight, there's a major meeting that's being held in Trinidad by CARICOM leaders. And so far, to make the sacrifice to be here with us, I'm truly grateful.
We do appreciate both of you being here.
My pleasure.
We do appreciate both of you being here. If it's one thing we know for sure, is that the Bahamian people love me and Mottley.
Thank you,
Chichi. Welcome back. You're welcome back anytime. We appreciate you both being here.
And I want to welcome you all down to Barbados too. I hope that we can have Bahamas in the north and Barbados in the south.
Promise, Mottley, you only have to say the word. I'm there. With bells on. I will be there. Present and accounted for.
Thank you, Chichi.
Thank you both so much.
Right.
We have more of a closer look when we come back. The quest for climate justice has begun. But if one thing is clear, it's that we cannot do it alone. To quote Jimmy Cliff, as so eloquently recounted by Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley, you can get it if you really try. And as a region, we are trying. And I, for one, am pleased to have two of the region's greatest climate champions in our corner. For Prime Minister Philip Davis and Prime Minister Mia Mottley, the work will not yield immediate results, but the fight is not one that we can give up on. The fight is not just one for our leaders, however. It is up to all of us, everyday Bahamians like you and I, to also do our part. We can make a difference by taking the small steps needed to reduce our individual and collective carbon footprints. If we are to demand change from the global community, if we are going to talk the talk, then we must also walk the walk. Today for me, tomorrow for you. Let's not forget the lesson in this idiom. Let us remember that we are all part of a global community. Our planet and our future depend on it. Till next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you and good night.